During the late 80s and early 90s, Hollywood had a number of international directors making their mark on the action genre. Directors like Tony Scott, Rennie Harlan, and Paul Verhoeven were at the top of their game when it came to action during this period. But there is one director who shaped the landscape of action like no other. A director whose films directly inspired the likes of the Wachowskis, 8711, and Quentin Tarantino, who not only inspired filmmakers but video game developers and even the Wu-Tang Clan. That director is John Woo. Whilst a highly celebrated director with an aging generation of filmgoers, not many younger audiences may know of his work. If you enjoyed the absurdity of Face Off, then you've already seen one of his films. During his time in Hollywood, John Woo directed a few major mainstream films before returning to Hong Kong in the mid-2000s. But for now, we're going to focus on one film before his time in Hollywood, when he was directing in his home of Hong Kong. He had written and directed a slew of beloved and successful films, but his best film to date, based solely on opinion of course, would be 1989's The Killer, starring Chow Yun-fat, Sally Yip, and Danny Lee. For those unaware, The Killer is a simple film about a hitman who falls for a woman who he accidentally blinds during a gunfight on one of his missions. Whilst the premise isn't overly complicated, there's a lot of depth to the story and characters. Writer and director John Woo describes the film as his dream movie, and is an amalgamation inspired by his favorite directors Scorsese, Peckinpah, Melville, and Ishii. Not only that, Woo was given complete control over this film, giving him the freedom to explore many themes and ideas: friendship, betrayal, loyalty, forgiveness, and love. Now, after 35 years and many production hurdles, the English remake has finally arrived, due to be released soon after this video goes live. Will it be a taut, entertaining action movie, or will it live in the enormous shadow cast by the original 1989 film? Before it drops, let's take a quick look into the John Woo classic, The Killer. The Killer tells the story of an assassin, Arjong, who accidentally blinds a musician in a bar whilst carrying out a hit. Overcome with guilt, he gets closer to the woman, Jenny, without her realizing he's the one who injured her in the first place. Meanwhile, Inspector Li Ying is after the elusive killer, but as he gets closer to his suspect, he begins to understand there's more to Arjong than he first thought. Things come to a head when Arjong and Inspector Li team up to protect Jenny and stop the triad hitmen who have come after them. Chow Yun-fat worked really well in the lead role of the killer, as Arjong, putting on his solemn yet charming demeanor for the character. He might be a killer, but he has heart, something important to Woo's characters across a number of the movies he's made. The killer is heavily inspired by Alain Delon's character in Jean-Pierre Melville's 1967 classic, Le Samouraï, a man who is also a lone professional killer. Inspector Li Ying is shown early on to be a determined cop who struggles with his own job. He's not necessarily a bad cop, but one who, in some instances, believes the by-the-book method could get more people hurt. Both Chow and Danny's characters sit on opposite sides of the law, but the Venn diagram of their beliefs coincide with their code of honor, or ethics you could say. The film contains a number of references to good and evil, right and wrong, the doves being a sign of peace, being used during a shootout in a church of all places, the destruction of the statue of Mary being a reference to the death of innocents. The use of doves would end up becoming a director trademark for Woo. His action trademarks are also seen here: dual weapons, highly destructive environments, and of course, lots of blood and bodies. But aside from these tentpoles of action, the film really is a romance film. It seems strange to say, but as I've gotten older, I've started viewing this film a bit differently. I mean, there's an obvious romance between Arjong and Jenny, the bromance between Arjong and Inspector Lee, but I've begun to see the film as a romance film between the viewer and the killer. No matter what part of the movie you're looking at, the film uses a lot of close-ups and slow motion, and scenes where you're just staring at Chow or other characters sitting there in thought. You spend time with the characters. Even in scenes without dialogue, you can read their thoughts and feelings. The music choices are often romanticized 80s tunes. Interestingly, this film would mark the beginning of a few of John Woo's trademarks, including the sliding, the doves, and reflections. Wu also experimented with a few techniques including montages, crossfades, and freeze frames to draw scenes out. One of my favorites is a multi-angle shot of a single movement. With the directing, script, and editing, the film seamlessly dances between action and drama. John had full control over all of these aspects, which is a rare treat for a director these days. He has expressed that The Killer feels like his most complete film, and I agree. As a result, one could argue that the film has something for everyone. A bit of romance, a bit of comedy, and a whole lot of bloodshed. If you've never seen this film, I highly recommend checking it out. It might be a bit hard to track down, but it's definitely worth it. Now, before the new film comes out, it's important to address a few things that I've seen commented online. Firstly, John Woo directed the remake, and by all accounts, he's rather proud of it. If your complaint is about gender swapping or race swapping, the man who made the original is happy with his casting choices. Not to mention, the original was heavily inspired by French film Le Samouraï, so the setting of Paris and using French actors seems fitting for a remake. Second, why not just release the old film on 4K? Now, as much as I would also love to see a 4K version of the original film that hasn't been digitally upscaled, the chances of this happening are slim to none. Wu stated in an interview in 2023 that he explored the possibility of doing this, however, he no longer had the rights to his older films, and the company that they sit with doesn't really want anything to do with them. To add to that, according to a video released in June 2024, Frank Zheng confirmed the rights for Asia belong to Fortune Star, who are a bit hit and miss when it comes to HD and remastered releases, and the international rights sit with Kowloon Investment Group, who are only interested in selling the rights to the entire Golden Princess library, not the individual titles. It is rumored to have a pretty hefty price tag at that. So only time will tell if this remake will be any good, and I'm looking forward to watching it. But I might update with a review once I have checked it out, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But for now, take care and I'll catch you in the next one.